Welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. Let us help you escape your mind.
All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 259 today. We are joined by friend of the show, Laura Tabone. We've had her on a few times. You can go check out those episodes. I have the links down below. We did actually a slideshow episode, and we discussed Malta and the Maltese megaliths because she lives on Malta, which is amazing. And you can check out all those links down below. I have her links to her YouTube channel. Please go follow that and subscribe. That's Megalith Hunter. She's on Instagram and also on Twitter. So please go check that out. And before we get started here, if you want to support Mind Escape, please click on the LinkTree link down below. We have merch. We've got Patreon. We've done Patreon episodes with Laura. As well as many other people into ancient mysteries and megaliths and stuff like that. A lot of amazing guests on there. So go check that out. And the easy way to support the show would just be to go on to Apple Podcast or Spotify and leave us a 5-star review. I really appreciate that. So, Shane is at Wounded Warrior, so he'll be back. And then Maurice will be back. And we have Rick Strassman on the show on the 30th. So welcome back on the show, Laura. How are you?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me. I'm really good, thank you.
So it's been a little bit. We tried to get this in before, but I was having some sort of internet connection issues when I moved. I've got that all figured out. And last time, we started talking about a couple different things. But I just want to say congratulations to you. You have recently been monetized on YouTube, which is a huge achievement. So congratulations there. And please, everybody, go check out Laura's channel. Run those numbers up for her. She's put a lot of time and a lot of effort into this. So go do that. So congratulations. And why don't we start with the Olmec stuff? Because I'm going to go through some of the videos you've made recently. One that really caught my mind or caught my attention was this Olmec rituals associated with psychedelics and possibly 5-MeO DMT. Let's jump into that.
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to do, so as you know, from the beginning of Megalith Hunter, I was doing a lot of videos on Malta because I lived there. And I wanted to feature the place where I lived and where I could actually visit the sites, film the sites, take photographs of the sites. But then I realized that realistically, you have to touch on other topics because as interesting as Malta is, there is a broader ancient megalithic landscape that needs to be explored. And there's a lot of cultures that came before and came after the megalith builders that are also very interesting within the whole context of trying to understand what the megalith builders' motivations were. So I kind of pivoted my channel from focusing just on Malta to looking at many other places, which unfortunately I cannot afford to visit, but there's plenty of information online. There's lots of peer-reviewed journals. There's lots of interesting books. So, and where I can, I feature photographs or video footage if it's open source. So I started to feature quite a number of different places. And I was reading about the Olmecs, the first high civilization of South America. And I was thinking, wow, this is so interesting. Like, I didn't know much about the Olmecs and all of the interesting kind of symbolism they left behind. And once I started to look into the symbolism, I realized that they featured the Sonoran toad a lot as an engraving or a painting on pottery. They actually made vessels shaped like this toad. And they also found the remains of this toad at various Olmec sites. So that led a lot of researchers to conclude that the toads were being used for their bufotenin, which is a psychoactive that they release. Okay, so it's not that the researchers are absolutely certain about this, but it's definitely a possibility, especially since with many later cultures in Central America, they were using a lot of different psychoactive substances in their rituals. That's fairly well attested, even in texts, foreign texts, as well as indigenous texts. So yeah, there's this kind of, so I found that really interesting. And obviously I knew you would love that part when I added that into my video on the Olmec.
What really struck me about that, though, is I've been told by a few different people that, 5-MeO is a relatively new discovery or compound in terms of so I mean, you can check out the Hamilton Pharmacopoeia episode, but supposedly the first person was in the 80s that kind of discovered that the Colorado desert toad, or the Bufo alivarius, excretes the 5-MeO from their glands, as like a defense mechanism. But some people, they'll catch them, they'll squeeze the glands, and then you dry it out, and that becomes what people, smoke when they do the 5-MeO ceremonies and everything like that. So I've been told that wasn't, by a lot of people that are into this topic, that's not, an ancient thing. It's a more recent thing. However, I agree with you. I think it's interesting that they had this toad symbolism in the pottery and the iconography. But my question is, so is there another explanation, though? Like, because I want it to be that. Obviously, that's awesome. But is there some other explanation given? Like, what was the more mainstream, or is that the mainstream for the?
Yeah, that appears to be the mainstream conclusion, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. I couldn't find any other explanation in the text I've read, although I haven't done an exhaustive search. But yeah, I didn't find it, because there was also a mask that was found which looked like what's that mushroom? The
Amanita muscaria.
That's it, the one with the dots.
Yeah.
And so there was even some idea that might have meant they also had the mushrooms within that culture. So, it doesn't mean that just because they had the mushrooms, they had the toad poison, but it's all very possible.
Right.
That they were
it
connected.
definitely makes sense. I mean, like you said, this is something I've studied for a long time, and most ancient cultures have ritual associated with entheogens or psychedelic, use. So I don't see why it would be any different. I mean, we have the Vienna Codex from Mesoamerica that shows all the sacred mushroom rituals and everything like that from the Toltecs and, the Aztecs and everybody. So, I mean, when it comes down to it, I'm all on board with that. I did read the paper after you made the video, and yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like there was a lot going on there. But there's one thing that's interesting about the Olmecs, and that's we still don't really know a lot about them. They have these large heads that I think most people are familiar with, those stone heads that kind of they're like the Mesoamerican versions of Easter Island, right? Like they kind of give you that vibe. But yeah, so like, what's the dating on the Olmecs? Do you know? Like a rough range?
I cannot remember because it's a while since I was doing that research. I have, hold on, I have some information.
Let me see if I can pull it up here.
So it first emerged in 1600 BCE.
Okay.
So, yeah. And I mean, like I always say, you need to understand, when we're trying to understand ancient cultures, understanding what before and what came after is really important. And if there is evidence of the use of psychoactive substances in later cultures, where did they get that idea from? There's every reason why they may have got it from the first high civilization of Mesoamerica. High meaning sophisticated, not the other kind. So I think it's entirely possible. And I mean, even when I'm looking at sites within the Mediterranean, a lot of the time, these megalithic sites, the archaeologists find really tiny vessels, which must have contained a precious substance. And since they were so small, it's very possible it was, well, alcohol or something that they only wanted to have in small doses for a ritual. These megalithic sites are known to be ritual sites. So even archaeologists put in a lot of papers that it's very possible that that's what these miniature vessels were for. I mean, when I say small, I mean really, really, really small.
Right.
So,
yeah, the interesting thing I saw recently too, speaking about the Mediterranean cultures and like the Eleusinian mysteries and all the mystery schools, you know, they keep finding these lizard bones in these vats that have all these other psychoactive compounds in them. And I've read something recently that they think that some of the species of lizards, there might be actually psychoactive compounds in their tails or something like that. I'd have to find this paper, but that would make sense because I always thought it was more like a symbolic thing or kind of like a witch's brew scenario. But I think that there's a little bit more of a method to that madness looking at it now. I don't know if you've heard anything about that.
no, I haven't. Send me the link to the papers. I'll look into it. That's really
Yeah.
interesting.
And there's like these large vats that were found near Pompeii that were sealed that had, you know, all sorts of tropanes and psychoactive compounds, you know, and they used pharmacon, which was like medicated wine in ancient times to induce these types of states. So yeah, I'll send you the link to that, but I found that was kind of interesting. But yeah, so the Olmec thing's interesting. For anybody that's wants to read more about this, I'll try after we're done, I'll add the academic paper that Laura sourced all this stuff from, so you can look at it. Is there anything else you want to add to that we didn't cover?
Well, just while we're talking about the Olmecs, one of the things that I found really fascinating was that archaeologists discovered a mosaic they had created, which had been then purposefully buried. So a beautiful mosaic that actually was never visible to the civilization that inhabited that particular area where it was found. And I thought, that's crazy because you find that at quite a few sites. Even in Malta, archaeologists were excavating the Santa Verna temple in Gozo a few years ago. It's just there's just a few blocks left of the Santa Verna temple. There isn't as much remaining as there is of the Shara Stone Circle or the Gigantia temples, which are close by, because Santa Verna at one point a church was built over the top, so it was reused in multiple periods. But anyway, underneath the ground, they found like a sort of small polygonal wall, which had been tiled with a specific limestone, which wasn't from the area. So it had been brought from somewhere else. It wasn't the same limestone that had been used to make the megaliths. And it was just this tiny polygonal wall stuck to, like, more like a cover, stuck to the foundation wall, and then it was buried. Why go to so much detail if it's only going to be buried? So archaeologists think that it was probably symbolic in some way, or some part of a foundation ritual, like when ritual deposits are placed under the threshold of a building, which is very common in many cultures all over the world. So that's something I really, I love finding those little things, because it was just mentioned and no one thought it was weird. It was just like a side note. And I thought that's crazy. Why would they go to so much effort and then bury it? Something so beautiful, something that has no structural function. It must be because there was some kind of foundation rituals, and foundation rituals have a hugely ancient history. You find them all over the place, these ritual deposits. So,
absolutely. Yeah, I've been noticing a lot of like mosaics being found recently, either Roman ones in, you know, the UK, or even Roman ones in the, you know, Mediterranean areas. So very interesting, and they're beautiful, and they still kind of hold their color and their vibe once they get them all cleared off. all this stuff. Have you ever seen that Werner Herzog, Werner Herzog documentary, Cave of Forgotten Dreams, about the Xavi cave?
No.
Definitely check that out. I just watched it. It's really awesome about, those cave paintings that were from 30,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. That cave was like sealed in and perfectly sealed based on this like rock wall falling over the entrance and everything like that. So there's just a lot of things that came together to preserve that site. And only like the scientists were allowed, and Werner Herzog had like a small team that was allowed there, and they were only allowed in there for like an hour. And there's a limited amount of oxygen because of the CO2 from the tree roots above, and there's just like a whole lot of things going on there, but very, very interesting. I highly recommend people check that out if you haven't already.
Well, I did a video on that. I'm not sure if you saw it, but there is a research paper a few years ago which says that one of the paintings looks as if it was done over the top of a previous earlier painting, and that earlier painting depicted a volcanic eruption.
Yeah, they talk about that in there because I
think that's crazy. I mean,
they can tell the age because of the calcite deposits, like it preserved the painting. So they can tell, like in the layers, like there was some that were drawn over, like stenciled over, and then there was other things drawn over too. So yeah, pretty fascinating.
Just imagine their faces, because I mean, you're just trying to think how the ancient inhabitants of that area felt when a volcano erupted, because they wouldn't see so many within their lifetime.
Right.
So it must have come as quite a shock. It must have been quite a frightening
And is there
experience.
even that much volcanic activity near France? I mean,
well, not anymore.
Right.
But the volcano that they think was depicted in the Paleolithic period did erupt. They found the date correlated with when the painting was done, so it makes sense. So,
absolutely.
yes. And that was like the hunter-gatherer period, so that must have been quite something,
right,
to witness.
All right. Let's talk about the 9,000-year-old submerged megalith in the Sicilian Channel, because I find that very interesting. And you live on Malta, which isn't too far from there. How deep and what kind of structure are we looking at here?
So this was quite a few years ago. It was in the news. I read about it, found it very interesting, but I didn't have my channel then. So recently I thought, let me revisit that, because it's fascinating. There is a paper on it, but it's not terribly detailed. I mean, the researchers found a megalith. I can't even remember how long it was. I put all the details in my video, but it's a substantial monolith that looks like it's artificially shaped with drilled holes in it, just like you get holed menhirs across Europe. And the diver researchers were quite convinced that it was artificial. But of course, this cannot be concluded with any certainty without further investigation. Now, its depth and location is in an area called the Pantelleria Vecchia Bank. So this bank would have been above water around 10,000 years ago, or 11,000 years ago even. At
the end of the last ice age.
Yeah, so the water obviously didn't rise super quickly. It took time, and researchers have mapped how the sea levels rose in the Mediterranean and which pieces of land was still above water at that time. So, of course, during the Ice Age, Sicily was a lot larger. Malta and Gozo were joined together, and Malta was joined to Sicily by a land bridge. At the time when this monolith, artificial or not, would have been above water, the land bridge was gone. There were Malta and Gozo were already separate. Sicily was smaller, but there were little islands, extra islands still within the channel, which are no longer there, which have been submerged since then. And this would have been on this sort of island, which has been called the Pantelleria Vecchia Bank, after the island of Pantelleria, which is nearby. Now, it doesn't make a lot of sense for a few reasons. Mainly, Sicily doesn't really have any megaliths, very few. There wasn't the sort of sophisticated megalithic culture present in the Neolithic that Malta has. Now, if you want to say, okay, but maybe this megalith was an extension of the culture that was based on Malta at the time, well, actually, this is much earlier than that. Malta wasn't inhabited until 8,000 years ago. And this megalith would be a couple of thousand years older than that. So what culture did it belong to if it was there? So yes, there is proper research into it. These are academics that put together a paper analyzing it and suggesting that it's artificial and that it's very ancient. But there's a lot of argument against it as well, because it doesn't make a lot of sense within what we know about the megalithic cultures in the Mediterranean at the time. So it's quite a mystery, and I love my mysteries.
Yeah, the menhir thing's interesting too. And then you see, I don't know if you see, I always post, there's a French account. They have like French postcards on Twitter of all the dolmens and the menhirs.
Yeah, I follow them.
Yeah. And I always love those because those are like classic pictures where, I mean, you can clearly see that these huge stones are being moved around. And France, I think, is kind of underrated for all their megalithic structures too, right? Like you have Karnak and you have those tombs that are pretty old, but I don't think it gets enough love, right?
Yes, there are tons in France. It's definitely on my list. I mean, just where Karnak is. Karnak obviously comprises thousands of standing stones, but that's not it. That area has so much else, and it's mind blowing, and it's all within villages that have been built since then, a bit like Avebury in England. So yeah, like I think that you can't walk anywhere without coming across some sort of megalith or tomb or tumulus. I really want to go there and just explore. The people that live there must get so annoyed. People just imagine you're following a line and then you're like, oh, the line stopped. I think it's in that person's garden. I bet they get people looking over their fences and everything, because I don't think they're all demarcated as protected public property. I think they're literally everywhere. So some must fall on private property as well.
What about by you in Malta? Do people get aggravated when people come to check out the megaliths there?
You get people staring at you a lot. Like when I go to the ones that are off the beaten track, so they're not, some of them are protected and they're on like public land. So it's okay. But still, you see people farming the land in the area just staring at you. Like, why are you taking a photograph of that stone? I just look at the cart ruts, so many cart ruts, and a lot of those are off the beaten track. But then sometimes I'll read about ones that are on private property, and I know I cannot access it. But if there's a road nearby, I take pictures from the road of the stones. And people are just looking at me like I'm the strangest person pulling over to take a picture of a field. But there are really good stones in there. And I mean, they don't do well on Instagram. I don't get many likes for my random stones that aren't part of picturesque, more complete structures. But
I like
for
them.
me, it's like a database of all the ones I can find. Yeah.
No, and again, please follow Laura on Instagram. She's got a great channel on there, Twitter, and I'm going to convince her to host a Twitter space with me here soon. And shout out to Sandy. We'll get Sandy up in the mix, and we'll be discussing all the mysteries. But yeah, the Sicilian one is interesting, obviously close to where I'm from, my heritage in Italy. And actually, you mentioned the land bridge connecting Malta. Do you think when it was above water, the water level was lower, that maybe Malta was like a ritual site for more of the mainland Italy, and people like possibly just using that as more of like a ritualistic site or island, or not island because obviously it was connected, but just a zone where people would go to as opposed to maybe living on?
I do think it was potentially a pilgrimage site for other cultures within the Mediterranean. although it's difficult because there's no evidence of that really. It's not like you find pottery and say, oh, that looks like it came with a pilgrim from another island.
Right.
But then again, amongst the Neolithic cultures, there wasn't so much difference in pottery, really, I guess. Early Neolithic pottery in Malta and Sicily was quite similar, which is why they think that the people that first inhabited Malta came from Sicily. But during the Ice Age, when the land bridge was present, there was actually there's no evidence for human habitation in Malta at that time. During the time of the land bridge, there was only settlements within Sicily. So at that point, I don't think there was any communication between the two places, except for animals. There's lots of fauna which made its way over to Malta and then became isolated as the waters rose. But during the later period when they were separated, it could well be that people visited from other areas because, like I always say, why did Malta have this sophisticated culture that just seemed to flourish from nowhere and to be quite different to anywhere else? But then, and then you have obviously a pretty sophisticated culture on Sardinia in the Neolithic as well, but their architecture was all funerary in nature rather than rituals of the living, which Malta appears to have like a bit of both. But then Sicily had nothing, and there's not a great deal in southern Italy either. So it makes I always say you need to look at where didn't have them rather than where did have them to kind of try and understand what was going on back then. Because it seems really disconnected to me.
You've been to Sardinia, and you've done some videos on it recently. Obviously, you have the Nuraghi culture, which has a lot of similarities to other Mediterranean cultures in terms of like the iconography and the statues and things like that. But then you also have, I guess my question is, like, the landscape. I know Sicily is kind of like, dry and barren in a lot of spots. Is Sardinia, is it green and lush, or like is it more hospitable? Like, what's going on there?
No, they're quite similar, really.
Similar?
They've got they've got like a mountainous landscape and lots of fertile ground. It's a lot drier than it was, though, in earlier times. But still, they have rivers and lakes and stuff that Malta doesn't have.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, they're both quite a bit wetter and definitely would have been, both of them, hospitable during the Neolithic. The Nuraghic culture in Sardinia is later, it's Bronze Age. The buildings are not so megalithic, really, but they are still quite complex. And nobody knows what they were for. And it seems there was cultural continuity in Sardinia between the Neolithic period where the inhabitants of the island built underground necropolis called Domus Tijanus, with lots of symbolism and painted horns and engraved horns and things, and the later Nuraghic culture, who just built thousands of towers for no obvious reason. So Sardinia's been pretty heavily inhabited by sophisticated cultures for a long time. Sicily, there's just not much until the classical period, really. And I'm always looking. Maybe we got something wrong. That's why I went to Sicily last week. I've been a couple of times this year, actually. And I was having a look at the classical period buildings and, just looking to see if there's any kind of indication that there was something earlier that maybe someone's missed. But it doesn't really seem like there is, apart from a couple of dolmens. And I mean, literally, I think there's 5 dolmens and a few interesting tombs.
What about stuff like underground, though? Because I think, like, is there like any excavation or digging going on there? Because in terms of like looking for that kind of stuff, because I feel like when they found all the megaliths on Malta, were they underground or were they just standing there? Kind of. No,
they were sticking out.
Yeah,
they were quite well known. They were covered in soil, but
it's like maybe there's more
sticking out.
Yeah, maybe there's more erosion or more coverage on Sicily. Maybe they need to do a little bit more digging or something like that.
Yeah, it could be. Because there is like a serious missing link here, in my opinion.
What about on Sardinia? That Santa, is it Santa Cristina or Cristiana? Do you know what I'm
Santa
talking about?
Cristina.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It's like it goes like down. It's kind of like a keyhole shape thing. It kind of reminded me of the tombs that they do in Japan. I don't know if you've ever seen those.
Ah, the keyhole tombs. Yeah,
Yeah, doesn't that kind of give you that
but
same
on a
kind of a vibe?
smaller scale.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
really does. It really does. That is quite crazy. I mean, they're totally different time periods, but
right.
supposedly, but they're very similar in architecture.
Yeah, I
Different
got
time
that
periods,
vibe.
different sizes, but yeah, I thought that they're not all keyhole shaped in Sardinia. I think these sacred wells, there's about 70 of them, but a few of them have that kind of distinctive keyhole shape.
Yeah, I know. Also, there's a lot of people that speculate. You know how I feel about Atlantis. You can go back and watch all the stuff
Yeah.
we've talked about. But a lot of people associate Sardinia with possibly being Atlantis too, with all the megalithic structures and the concentric circle structures and all that kind of stuff. I mean, when you went there, was there anybody talking about that or any kind of a vibe about that, or no, not really? Nobody's making those
No,
connections.
not really. I read some newspaper reports from this journalist, Italian journalist that is quite convinced that Sardinia was Atlantis. I did a video on that, and he thinks that in the south, it's quite clear there was a tidal wave that covered the south and it left a lot of sediment, and he thinks that. And he changed the dating of when that would have happened, so it would be more recently. So Atlantis was a more recent kind of lost civilization. Right. I don't know. None of it really holds up to scrutiny, but I don't think that he's done any academic research on it. I believe there was supposed to be a whole team doing something based on that, and there was a press conference years ago, but I've never seen anything come out of it.
Yeah.
And then of course there's I think there was some etymological connections as well because of the connection of Sardinia with other cultures. But honestly, it's difficult to follow any of it, really. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And I don't think that Sardinia can be Atlantis because Malta was, so,
Right.
obviously.
No, I agree. Yeah, I mean, again, you can go back and watch my takes on that. Let's talk about precision astronomy, or astronomical alignments. You did a video that like 8,000 years ago that this was happening. Can you describe that a little bit and go into a little bit more depth with that?
Yeah, so I was looking at the Almendras cromlech in Portugal. So I'm aware that the megalithic structures on the Atlantic coast of Iberia and France are very ancient. They really are thought to be much older than the stone circles in Scotland, which are obviously going back to 5,500 years ago, same as the Maltese temples approximately. And I just thought, wow, because those structures in Iberia and France, so I looked at Karnak and I looked at the cromlech of Almendras, they are both pretty extensive complexes. And many researchers have found alignments, and more than just your standard solstice equinox, which always gets talked about. They found other alignments as well. So we could be looking at actual observatories, observing lunar phenomena, observing stellar phenomena, observing solar phenomena. And I just think that's crazy because a lot of these cosmological cycles would have taken place over many years. So it means that generations are passing on that information for observation, for that accuracy to be there. Now, I can't comment too much on the details of the papers because I'm not an archaeoastronomer. And I do think I need to really learn that skill before I can comment. But at the moment, what I do is I at least report on what I find. And if these researchers are correct, then we're looking at something very interesting going on in the ancient past. I would be willing to say they are observatories. It doesn't have to be something super mystical either. Why not? Why would they not be able to pass on the information over generations just because they didn't leave written text that we understand today?
Right.
Or, maybe they had a written text or a way of recording it that we're just not, well, maybe the stones were the way of recording it. I don't know. And it's entirely possible. Why not? And it could be, Might not be for mystical reasons. It could be for entirely practical ones, to do with the passing of the years, to do with understanding when seasonal variability was going to take place, or when a certain cycle might happen that could lead to famine, whatever. Maybe they understood much broader cycles than we think they did. But it could also be, I mean, I've been reading a lot about ancient Egypt lately, and no one really knows where that sky-earth cosmology came from. It was extremely sophisticated, and it's thought to be rooted in the lives of the desert people when the desert was greener. You've got Nabta in the stone circle, and it does look like that had certain astronomical alignment. So it's very possible that the sky-earth cosmology started quite early on by pastoralists when the desert was greener, before they moved into the Nile Valley. But then all of a sudden you've got something incredibly sophisticated taking place. And I don't know, I wonder, could it be that in ancient times, even in the Neolithic across Europe, there was some sort of rudimentary sky-earth cosmology in existence? And it doesn't necessarily mean that all these cultures were connected. It could be that it was just a natural stage in cultural evolution, that people realized the importance of light and the life-giving attributes of the sun and of water, as they built up a whole cosmology around it and did lots of practices related to it. Because also, as I always say, and I did like a dissertation on ancient rituals, people always try to domesticate chance. They try to control their environment. And when there's something that you don't completely understand, people use rituals, whether it be a lucky charm or whatever, or a prayer, to try to control their environment. So it would make sense if some kind of sophisticated rituals were in place purposefully for that. And yeah, I think it's all entirely possible.
Yeah, it's interesting. The early Egyptian cosmology starts with everything coming from water or emerging from water, as well as a lot of all the other cultures. It's like, we now know through evolution that a lot of the stuff evolved out of water, but did they have some sort of inkling of that, or was it just more instinctual? I always think about that. Like, what did they really know about what they were writing down and discussing back then, and how much of it plays into what we know now, or was it completely different? That's something I think about a lot.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I always, have you ever read Martin Sweatman's Prehistory Decoded on Göbekli Tepe and the alignments, the astronomical?
I read the paper, and I also read the refutal by the academics of the paper. Yeah,
there's that one guy that runs that YouTube channel that tries to debunk anything that might have any sort of mystical or metaphysical attributes. What's that guy's name? I can't think of it right now.
I remember. But Martin, he wrote that, and I read it. I thought, this is quite interesting. But the first question I had was, if you say that all this symbolism on this pillar represents an early zodiac, then it has to apply to all the other enclosures and all the other symbols. And it doesn't really. And then I found a refutal paper by the actual academics that work on the site.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about, there's a guy, Jens Norgren or something like that. There's a guy that's on Twitter.
I can't remember who wrote it, but I'll send you the link. But he basically, or it was a team of them, they refuted all the points within the same journal. And sort of gave their opinions on it, and went kind of point by point. So it's very interesting to read both of those. Definitely there's something there. Obviously there's something interesting that was going on there. But it's hard to come up with a really conclusive idea that is not subject to a lot of scrutiny. Because, there's so much variability within the site itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm open-minded about it. I look at all the academic stuff. Obviously, I've looked at all the fringe stuff and all the interesting elements of that. But but I mean, until it's completely excavated and until, they look at Karahan Tepe and all the other surrounding sites and kind of maybe get a more broader view of what was going on in that area at the time. I think we, should all just reserve our speculations until there's more stuff out there. But it's fun, right? It's fun to speculate. It's fun to...
I like to speculate. We can. We're not academics. We can do as we like.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, this is the thing. I really appreciate people like Martin putting the effort into writing those papers, because it opens your mind. It explores certain areas. It gets you thinking in ways that you might not have before. So why not?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm completely... I'm in favor of that. As long as nobody's too dogmatic either way. I know academics tend to get dogmatic about their own positions, and they've spent their lives on this, but they're just human beings too that have cognitive biases like everybody else, and pareidolia and lots of other things. So I think it's important to keep that in mind.
I desperately want to look at something like Avebury and Stonehenge and picture this incredibly complex ritual landscape, that these people lived in a golden age and they knew things that we don't even know today.
Right.
But it could have just been a restaurant or something. I'd be so disappointed if I found out it was just a Neolithic restaurant. That's it. And they just made it really pretty because they were competing with the restaurant down the road.
Right.
Yeah, that'd be so disappointing.
Hey, I mean, but we know that they were making beer in ancient Egypt. We know they were making beer at Göbekli Tepe, So it's like things like that are very fascinating. And obviously the dawn of civilization / agriculture and all that kind of stuff has always fascinated me. And I don't know if you ever think about this, but we've domesticated a bunch of different animals now, but people say that we've domesticated ourselves. My question is, when and why did that happen? Did we domesticate ourselves because we became hyper aware of supervolcanoes and ends of ice ages and floods and things like that, and we decided maybe it's not the best idea to keep moving around nomadically, and maybe we should plant some roots and fortify ourselves in some kind of way, or prepare for these things? I don't know. These are just speculations, but something.
And I read once, it wasn't even an easier life for us once the agricultural revolution took place. We kind of think, it must have been easier. But I read something about an anthropologist wrote it, and they assigned points. I'm talking about something that I read about 5-10 years ago. So sorry, it won't be super accurate, but basically they assign points about, they say humans naturally want to use less energy. And if you assign points to different periods in history and you look at how much energy they used based on that, the sort of sophistication of that culture, let's say, we actually ended up not being better off nutritionally or in terms of the energy expenditure after the agricultural revolution. And anthropologists are fully aware of this and think it's a strange thing that then we continue down that trajectory. So it's questionable.
Interesting. Yeah.
I'll send you the book. I'll find it and I'll send you the picture of the front of it so you know what I'm talking about.
Send it my way. Let's see here. You did a video on how Cahokia was not a meeting place. Can you tell us what's going on there?
Yeah, so this team of archaeologists took sediment samples from not all of the plazas surrounding it, but just the North Plaza. And they found it was actually underwater during the time Cahokia was in use. So then their natural suggestion from that was, well, maybe all the plazas were underwater. So they weren't the area where people were meeting. The main mound had some sort of significance, but it wasn't surrounded by meeting places as was originally thought. And I mean, this is obviously a thing with mounds, isn't it? You've got Silbury Hill in England, which is a very marshy landscape. And when you even drive past it, you see often it's in the winter, it's surrounded by water. The primordial mound coming up from the water, that's what I always think. which is in all these ancient religions.
Right.
And a lot of artificial mounds appear to have been surrounded by water. So it just sort of bolsters that idea that for a long time, for thousands of years, in many different cultures, in different parts of the world, the idea of a primordial mound was celebrated, emerging from the water, as humans once did, like you say.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about that too. So obviously we have all the Native American mounds of North America, and actually there's mounds in South America as well. And the interesting thing to me is there's also mounds in the UK. I know there's that movie too that came out recently where that woman found a Viking burial on her property. I'm forgetting the name of the movie. I recommend people check.
You mean
it
the
out.
one about the Sutton Hoo?
Yes.
The Anglo-Saxon masks and all that, yeah.
Yeah. So those were mounds too. So like, what's the connection there? Is that just something that human beings were doing and maybe some sort of collective unconscious or something like that? Or, do you know what I'm saying? Like, because there was already pyramids built at that time. So why were
Exactly.
the mounds going on both in the UK and in North America and South America? And if there was no connection between those cultures?
And across Europe as well.
Right.
I mean, mounds are literally everywhere. And okay, to some extent, I understand it when it's burial mounds, like the Etruscan tumuli. All right, fine, makes sense. They're quite similar to kurgans that you get in Siberia as well, which are also circular mounds. All right, from a burial perspective, I can understand it. Because if it's above ground, it's easier to visit, to pay your respects to the ancestors.
Right.
It's easier to reuse it and keep adding people from the same tribe or clan or family as they pass. But a lot of them are not burial mounds. I mean, certainly Silbury Hill isn't. It was just built for no obvious reason. So I really do wonder about that. And then I wonder about maybe the burial mounds were based on those other mounds that were being used for some sort of ritual. And I really do see this idea of a connection between these cultures. It doesn't have to be, but there could be, because it's strange.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so like the explanation usually for why pyramids were being built roughly at the same time on different continents and no connection between these cultures and different things is that, like I said, it's just the easiest, most logical next step forward to gain height and build up would be to build a pyramid or to build a mound. I don't like that answer. It just doesn't satisfy me. And I'm open to mainstream stuff. I'm open to fringe stuff. I love both. I think that there's truth, obviously, in both of those things. And I think that they tend to clash a lot of the times. But at the end of the day, it's like there's these certain things that, like this mound thing or why pyramids were built, why was this structure, just the idea that, it was just basic or that was the next logical step. Like that doesn't sit with me. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you feel about that, but just this idea that, that's just what people were doing. I don't know. No, I feel like there's got to be more to it.
I understand the sort of monumentalization idea when it comes to tombs and king's tombs and tombs of important people.
Right.
But many buildings were not for that, or they haven't found burials within them. And that's certainly the case with many mounds. And, you think, well, a mound and a pyramid is much more difficult to build. Actually, with many mounds, they moved tons and tons of earth to create them. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that easy either. So there has to be some really big reason behind it. I don't know. And like we were saying, the primordial mounds, their proximity to water, the Cahokia research just seemed to back up that idea that they were trying to celebrate something to do with origins. And how they would know, I don't know. How would they know that we originally came from what? It's crazy.
Yeah, and there's walls around a lot of these too, made out of trees that took a lot of time and effort as well. Actually, if anybody's interested, we've done a few episodes with Dr. Gregory Little One of them we did a slideshow episode where we went through like all the Native American mounds in North America, or at least the most important ones. And he's a wealth of knowledge on the topic. He actually wrote this huge book, this illustrated book on all the Native American mounds, so people can go check that out for a resource. And we discuss a lot of different stuff with him over the years, but yeah, he's really good with all the ancient mound stuff. And follow him on Twitter because he's always posting Native American mound stuff on there as well. But yeah, fascinating stuff. I do kind of want to get. Do you have any more information on the cave art depiction of the volcano? We were talking about Chave Cave or Chavi. I think Werner Herzog calls it Chavi, so I don't know if it's Chave or Chavi.
I thought it was Chave in French, but
yeah, I thought
I
so
don't know.
too. Yeah,
I haven't studied it since I was 16, so I could be.
He's
really
German,
wrong.
so who knows what he's doing with it. But yeah, 35,000 years old or year-old cave art depicting the volcano. And one thing I will say about that documentary that I found very interesting is these artists were trying to show motion in this cave art. They would stencil like outlines outside of the lines of the animals to show some sort of motion, almost like a animation, like pre-animation kind of a thing, which I thought was very fascinating, very advanced too. But yeah, do you have any other information about the volcano aspect of that?
Well, not really about Chave Cave, but I put in the same video about Çatalhöyük in Turkey, the early Neolithic settlement, because there's a mural there that appears to show a volcanic eruption on a twin-peaked volcano that is located nearby. So it seems that there, within that settlement, they were painting what they were seeing. And I just thought that's mental. Like, imagine, did they not think maybe instead of painting it, we should move? I don't know.
Right.
It's just like, it tells you a little bit about what the society was experiencing at the time and how they reacted to such a disaster.
Yeah, I mean, the volcano thing is always fascinating me. How come, we always talk about floods and flood myths and all this other stuff, but super volcanoes and volcanoes have done some serious damage to humanity. I mean, we're talking, you have the 74,000 years ago, you have Lake Toba in Indonesia, which caused, a bottleneck where there was supposedly only 10,000 humans left. You have the New Zealand eruptions that caused, weather to change. A drop of 6 to 10 degrees is huge when you're talking about agriculture and things like that. So yeah, I always wondered why the volcano thing didn't get more coverage in terms of devastation and cataclysm, and something that we should be more mindful of.
Yeah, and they're everywhere. I mean, just driving through Sardinia, okay, it's a very ancient landmass. Probably, I think it's something like one of the oldest landmasses in the Mediterranean, created from volcanic eruptions hundreds of thousands of years ago. So they've been extinct for a long time. So now it's all very green and lovely.
Right.
Whereas when you go to Etna, obviously it's quite, well, when you get up Etna, it's dark and it's not a nice landscape. It's dark,
Right.
It's foggy, and it's like just this like brown soil everywhere. But when you go to extinct volcanoes that have been extinct for a very long time, they now make all these beautiful mountains, just like Scotland is made up of quite a few extinct volcanoes. And I just can't get my head around it. I mean, I know the Earth has a very long history, and England was once under a tropical ocean, so they find fish that are hundreds of millions of years old as well. And you have, and it used to be closer to the equator. And yes, I know the Earth has been through all of this, but thinking about since humans have been around, the amount of eruptions there have been and how much the landscape has changed is quite crazy. So
Absolutely.
People have witnessed quite some disasters.
Yeah. We did a multi-part series on super volcanoes. If anybody's interested, go back and check those out. Because I go through all of the super volcanoes across the globe, and then obviously Yellowstone and Lake Toba specifically, because they're huge and they're
Yeah.
their impact is been super massive. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we're discovering. They can determine, like the direction in which some of these volcanoes erupt based on, so like the iron that comes out in the rocks will settle towards the different magnetic points and things like that. So there's really a lot of interesting stuff that goes into figuring this stuff out. So again, go check those episodes out. I want to talk to you about this Armenian Stonehenge that was possibly 30,000 years old. What can you tell me about that?
Well, that also doesn't really stand up to scrutiny. As I say, I'm not an expert in archaeoastronomy, but a lot of researchers have said that it's quite tricky to give it these to say that it had these alignments, because it seems to be part of a much later Bronze Age necropolis. Based on the excavations, there's nothing really that dates it to that time. And when I just look on Google Earth and I look at the makeup of it, and it's supposed to take the shape of like Cygnus as well. I don't know. I don't really see it. It depends which stars you're going to include, right? I mean, and then how do you explain the anomalies?
Well, you have to go back too, right? You'd have to use some sort of modeling of the precession at the time, some sort of computer modeling of what the stars, the alignments and everything.
They've used the modeling and everything, but I'm just saying there's so hundreds of standing stones there, and they won't all fit the pattern regardless of when you look at. So I think it's quite tricky to say that, and there doesn't seem to be much support for that idea. But it is certainly a strange sight. I mean, the carved holes, which some archaeologists think came later than when it was originally built. I mean, what was their purpose? You have holed megaliths everywhere. Even in Malta, there's holed megaliths, which they call the oracle holes, but they don't know what they were for. There's loads of menhirs across the UK which have the holes carved in at eye level, as if they were for viewing something. But no one knows exactly what they were for.
So they're called oracle holes. Maybe there's like somebody standing on one side with their ear to the hole, and some other like, "Hey, this is what's gonna happen."
Well, that's what they say in Malta, but it's just a name that's kind of caught on. But it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, I gotcha. What's interesting you now? Like, what are you interested in now? Is there any mysteries that you've come across that are really anomalous to you, or is there anything recently that you've been looking into that really kind of piques your interest?
Oh, so many things. But I'm pretty obsessed with the Cyclopean walls in Italy, because I had read about them and I've seen them on YouTube and everything. But when I actually went to visit, I went to see a whole bunch on hilltops in March. I was staying in a village called Veroli in the Apennine Mountains. So I was on this hill, and it has one. And then driving from hilltop to hilltop. And I was just like, my goodness, I didn't know there were so many. I mean, there are tons. I've been plotting them all on a map. There are so many. And they're thought to be Roman, which makes sense because some of them are the foundations to Roman buildings, Roman road substructures, Roman fortifications. But there's also many reasons why that doesn't make any sense. For a start, the Romans talked extensively about their construction techniques, and they never mentioned this particular one. And you often find the Cyclopean wall right next to one with the square tufts, square tuff blocks, which is their regular building type. And I've gone through loads of magazines on archaeology, books, peer-reviewed journals written by archaeologists on construction techniques in ancient Rome. And this never comes up. No one seems to know, but they just say they're Roman. So I don't know, when you talk about the possibility of a lost civilization, when you're driving around there looking at them, you do think, oh, there's something going on here.
Well, what about the idea though? So like we know the Greeks were there first. And the Greeks built Cyclopean walls. There's evidence at Mycenae and Tiryns. Do you think that could have been left over from the Greeks, possibly?
The Greeks, well, that's the problem. According to archaeologists and academics, the Greeks came much later into Italy. So you had the Iron Age Villanovan culture, which then the Etruscans were descended from, and the other Iron Age cultures that inhabited the Italian peninsula. It was their descendants that then became the Italic tribes, which eventually became ancient Rome and Etruscan and all the other tribes that there were, the Hernici, which eventually all got absorbed by Rome. Then the Greek colonists started to come later. So according to the mainstream record, the Greeks weren't there until much later. And the Roman legends about being descended from Trojans or Greeks is rubbish. They're just myths. Because they wanted to give themselves this kind of legacy, but it doesn't match the language or the archaeological record, the languages or the archaeological record. The Italic tribes did not come from Greece. The Greek colonists came later. So that's where there's confusion. Now, even within Italy, the legend has it within these hilltop towns that the Cyclopean walls were built by the Pelasgians, and the Pelasgians are seen as this very ancient Greek culture, pre the classical period, probably commensurate with the Bronze Age, with the Minoans and the Mycenaeans and all of that, or even before that. They're just seen as this mythical people that were kind of indigenous to Greece and very early in Greece. But the archaeological record just doesn't support it. So that's why they keep saying they're Roman. But that I just don't buy it. And after I've gone and had a look at them, it almost looks like the Romans just reused those structures later. And there were loads of them, just so many. Yeah. I tried to plot it against where we know the Etruscan settlements were, and it doesn't match that. It does sort of match the Roman settlements, but then not all of them. And there's none in actual Rome itself. So why would they build them all over the countryside and not in Rome, but they're not on the East Coast, only on the West? Something's missing. And I've become a bit obsessed with it. I just keep making plans to see more of them.
Yeah, I always thought the Greeks were there on the west or the east coast of Italy, not before, but based on, you get the Eleatic school, which comes later, classical period, the pre-Socratic philosophers. But before then, you have Magna Graecia, and you have a lot of going back and forth in the Mediterranean there. But yeah, I got to look into more of what you're saying, though, because I was always under the assumption that the Greeks, since the Minoan and the Mycenaean times, were going back and forth. But it would make sense that there was already indigenous Italian people there. So
they were trading with them, but only on a limited level, and that's what's so confusing.
Well, that's what I always pictured is the Greeks around the edge, on the coasts, and then there had to have been some sort of indigenous people on the mainland and the Upper Italy and that kind of a thing.
The Etruscans became very Hellenized. They were very influenced by the Greek colonists. It's a strange one. I don't think they're Roman. If you go back and say, the Greeks influenced, the Greeks just weren't in all those places, even after they colonized certain areas. So it must be in my opinion, a much earlier Greek migration, something even Bronze Age, but there just isn't any evidence for it. They just can't find anything in the archaeological record that supports much earlier colonists bringing that technology that is all over, it's all over Greece and Anatolia. So right. I don't know. It's strange to me. I don't know why we can't say there is a connection or why they can't find any link, unless there was another place where this technology kind of came from that hasn't kind of been discovered yet, or it's been missed, and then it kind of passed to both those places separately. But that would be crazy, because you would have noticed these walls are pretty obvious.
Right.
They're very obvious. I mean, when I arrived in this one hilltop town of Alatri, and we were just driving up the hill, and I was really excited, and my dad said, "Send me pictures when you see the walls." See how sad we are. This is. So
everybody's staring at you. You're taking pictures. You're taking pictures of rocks, and everybody's staring at you.
And there's one that's right outside the main gate, and I was just jump out the car, take a picture. It's covered in signs and electric wires. It's not even the ones that are labeled to go and actually look at as a tourist.
Right.
They're not the pretty ones, but I was just like, I wanted every single wall
So
in my
how,
camera.
because like the Mycenaean and Tyrans, roughly 1600 BC. How old do you think that these Italian Cyclopean walls are?
Well, I don't know. I mean, they say they're Roman, and they're probably first century Roman, so quite late on actually in the Roman era. But I personally think they could be any age. I mean, even I was just going down a hill. I went to Castel San Pietro, which is this on the top of a hilltop, tiny village near the much bigger town of Palestrina, where there's quite a lot of walls. And on the way down, just going around a bend, I saw another wall. It's almost like there's loads of circular fortifications going all the way up to what is a very small settlement at the top. And you're just thinking, why were they doing that? Because, I mean, I can understand the main one at the top sort of supports the hillside, creates a fortified defense. It's earthquake proof potentially compared to other walls. All right, fine. But they're literally everywhere. I mean, they're even in aqueducts. It just, I don't know. It seemed strange to me. I just wasn't expecting there to be quite so many. And when I would read anything about it where people say, oh, they're not Roman, I'd be like, whatever. You know, because I try not to be too alternative, because I really do look at all the peer-reviewed information before I speculate on anything alternative. But this was just, come on, not Roman.
Yeah, I always thought about it like this. Like, we know all the Greeks would go to Egypt to learn. There's a lot of Egyptian influence on the Greeks. And then I look at it as like a transfer, and then you have the Greeks, and then after the Greeks, you have a lot of influence on the Romans, you know, from the Roman philosophers taking from all the Greek philosophers. And then even like Marcus Aurelius rebuilding Eleusis for the Eleusinian mysteries and things like that, trying to preserve those, you know, those initiatory, ritualistic aspects of the culture. And, you know, the thing that's always fascinated me is it does seem like ancient Rome was more of like an extension of ancient Egypt or ancient Greece, as compared to like how Egypt and Greece were two distinct cultures. While there might have been influence on Greece, you know, it's still very different. But I see ancient Greece and Rome having a lot of crossover, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I see it. And they just say, well, Hellenization.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, really, I mean, even the Phoenicians, their deities, their amulets, much of their material culture was very Egyptian in outward appearance.
Mm-hmm.
And, because they were heavily influenced. All right, fine. But was it, to what extent? I mean, how? I don't know. I always question this. Like, to what extent is it a cultural exchange or more of a stronger relationship? I don't know.
Right.
Because I find it strange that all the myths put the Romans back to the Aegean or to Anatolia, but then the archaeological records says no, they're just myths though.
Right.
But I don't get it. Why would you just make that up? Like, I understand they often want to give themselves, like I read this interesting book lately about how even within the classical period, lots of new city-states or that were trying to become part of Athens, they were giving themselves these really interesting back histories that were completely false, just to be associated with the heroic age. So they had something in common with the sort of city-states they were trying to have a relationship with. All right, fine, I get that. But the Romans seem to be quite independent, feisty people. Why did they want to give themselves that rather than just create their own? I can completely understand them copying it, but like making this strong relationship at the time. And they did. They even went to the Aegean. They sponsored the building of various monuments. They seem to be pretty obsessed with the area. Why couldn't they just carve out their own culture and just sort of copy it, or say they're the real one, or whatever, you know, like in ancient history people do all the time? But they seem to want to have that connection. So I do think that sometimes mythology, there's more to it and legends than we like to believe. I
Yeah.
understand it's difficult to find the traces in the archaeological record. Often it is. Fair enough. But I don't think they should be dismissed so freely either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with the mythology thing, I think it's interesting because on one end, I look at like all the pantheon of gods and the way that it's treated by academics. Like you have these academics talk about this stuff as if it's fantastical or it's nonsense or, like nobody's taking it seriously, but it's like obviously these people were inspired to do a lot of the stuff by these gods or entities or whatever. So the fact that they don't give that aspect of it respect, there are some, Egyptologists and stuff like that, but it seems to be like when you start talking about like pantheon of gods and religions and rituals, it turns more into like a anthropological endeavor as opposed to a archaeological. But I think that it would be short-sighted to not look at that as the source of that. Like I said, like I think like you said, there's something to mythology, and I agree. I think that there's something to mythology, to the pantheon of gods and things like that. As where, you have everybody believing Zeus and Poseidon, Poseidon's controlling the ocean and wiping boats out and this and that. And then Thales comes along and he says, no. There's a natural explanation for this and here's what's going on, kind of a thing. At the same time, again, I don't think we should discount the mind and the reason why people were associating those things. I'm not saying that those gods were real or anything like that, but I do think that there is something to all that, especially when you look at like were these attributes that some actual human beings had, like some ability to maybe forecast the weather, or like Thales was able to calculate when the eclipse was going to happen, things like that, and you start to attribute those traits to gods, and those might have been human beings before, or they might have been, who knows? We're talking about psychedelics earlier. They could have been psychedelic entities conveying some sort of message through some sort of metaphysical experience, things like that. So I wonder why some of that stuff's not taken more seriously, or at least analyzed in more of a connection to the physical, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Definitely, I think that it could be that people were seeing entities on these. They were all high, just like, and that's where they got the idea from in the first place. Or it could be that everybody needs a hero. People need a hero, especially in times where you didn't buy your food from a supermarket,
Right.
where there was so much uncertainty. I think where you could get sick and, that was it. So life expectancy was low. You'll do anything to control your environment, whether that's through ritual, whether that's through entering an altered state of consciousness and asking for advice from whatever you see in that altered state of consciousness, whether it's making the local strongest person into a hero and then saying that they could lift mountains and things. And I think as well with oral storytelling, it's usually quite elaborate because it needs to be remembered. So it's not always to be taken literally, but that still doesn't mean that it's completely a false story.
Right.
It could just be a way of making sure that the next generation remember it.
Right.
The wilder, the better.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is I think that I've mentioned this many times on the podcast as well, whether you believe in these gods or entities or goddesses or religions or whatever, I think that there's an actual evolutionary purpose to it. Like I think that, for whatever reason, whether we need some sort of mystery to figure out to move on to the next thing or whatever the case may be, there is an element of like dangling the carrot in front of ourselves, if you will. So whether it's subconscious or conscious or whatever, but I do think that that's important to at least look at, because I think, I don't know, I just, like I said, I see I see all these archaeologists and the way they talk about this stuff, and it's just like so like they wonder why more people don't pay attention to their work and why they're more attached to like ancient aliens or some sort of crazy fringe thing or whatever. And again, I think that they're missing the point. And I would even point out too, I know I shit on ancient aliens a lot, but that's where I found out about Göbekli Tepe. I didn't learn about that in school. You know, we learned the standard 4,500-year-old Giza Plateau, and then, you know, or Sumerians, and then the Giza Plateau, and then work your way through more modern traditional. You know, we didn't even really learn about like Malta or any of that stuff. So it's like what's going on? I don't know. I think
because I wasn't even into history at school. It was just at home I was reading about megalith stone circles and things that my dad had on his bookshelf. But in school we were learning about, so in primary school, so the first school, there was a little bit, we touched on some Egyptian stuff.
Right.
Then it was more about Romans and World War II, Romans and World War II. Very interesting, important things to learn about, but they weren't my like passion.
Right.
I think it's also just because there's so many Roman sites, right? So in England, when they want to take you on a school trip, there's just so many options. But I didn't know much about anything else. I learned about Malta probably from a Graham Hancock book, actually. Yeah, from Underwater, I think it was. That's where I learned about the Maltese temples and then came to have a look at them myself. I didn't know a great deal about the Sumerians. I didn't know a great deal about silly things. Let's say silly, like the French Revolution, really interesting time. There was a lot of interesting things going on to do with Egyptian religion being revisited during that period, and all sorts of really crazy stuff that I had no idea about, which I learned later in life. So, and I'm just sat there reading these things, which are all fact, thinking, why has no one ever talked about this? This is huge. Why does no one ever talk about this? So
I feel the same way, and like I said, it shows, you know, as much as we joke around, and I don't believe aliens built anything. I believe in UFOs, and obviously that's, you know, I'm interested in all that stuff. I don't believe that any beings came down and built anything. I think it's all human ingenuity, and you know, obviously we don't understand a lot of the techniques and the technology and whatever they were using to build a lot of these sites. But some of them we do, you know, so I think that that's where the disconnect happens. But yeah, I would just point out that as much as, you know, archaeologists and anthropologists and, you know, they're all pissed and, you know, they hate ancient aliens. Well, it's like, start getting that out there, you know, start doing YouTube channels, start doing shows on History Channel, you know. I would watch a show on History Channel if it just showed Göbekli Tepe and all the ancient megalithic sites and didn't add the element of aliens building it and just talked about the sites and stuff like that. But there's not, that show doesn't exist, you know, so.
You remember there was all this stuff back in the day about the aliens genetically engineered us and stuff. All right, that one, I don't believe it, but it's a better argument than they just came and started building stone things.
Right.
I'll go for that. Because if I'm a highly advanced alien civilization, I might want to genetically mess around with another planet. But but stones, really? I'm just going to fly all the way there and build stones. Right. I don't think so.
Yeah, and, you know, if you can build these smooth, beautiful, aerodynamic, anti-gravity crafts, you know, you can't make these stones look a little bit better. I mean, they look great. Don't get me wrong. For humans, they look great. Yeah. But for something beyond, so that would be my whole thing with that. But, you know, like you mentioned, like I could be, you know, we talk about panspermia, we all might be aliens in some regard. And the other thing that I find interesting too is, you know, we're talking about entheogens and psychedelic rituals and things like that. I could totally be on board that humans have been being brought along or inspired from ancient times or something like that through metaphysical practices and altered states and things like that. I'm on board with that. I find that interesting, and I've had my own weird experiences with that. So, but yeah, I think that
I think I've seen some aliens when I've had 2 bottles of wine.
But yeah, I mean, it's just, it comes down to like, I think that there's a disconnect between the fringe communities with this stuff and the academic stuff. But the academics don't realize they're just not making it interesting enough, and they're not talking about the aspects of these sites that people want to know about because they're so worried about their own, work or whatever they're fascinated with. And I think that science and archaeology, whatever, should serve the public. It shouldn't be. This is something astronomer Avi Loeb has said on our podcast because he is looking for signs of alien life and extraterrestrials and things like that. So science should be serving the public interest and not their own interest. And I think that that's part of the problem. So
yeah, I agree. And I think as well, everyone loves a bit of speculation, and you don't necessarily have to say, so like I go through a peer-reviewed paper and I look for the gaps and I look for where the actual authors have said, we don't know why this is.
Right.
And then I say, okay, so when I do speculate, it's based on where there really is a mystery, not where I say there's a mystery when I haven't even read the evidence on that site. But the problem is that then we kind of fill that hole with a bit of speculation because everybody wants that speculation. And you do start to find connections, and you look at geological papers, archaeology papers. You can look at anything from different disciplines because we're independent researchers, so it's okay to do that.
Right.
And I think that they're kind of stuck in terms of creating a new hypothesis can be quite terrifying. It still needs to be within certain parameters to be accepted. I think that any kind of wild speculation or popular books they're never really there because they don't want to. Speculation might appear too sensationalist. So and everybody wants to keep their job and to be taken seriously for every new piece of academic research that they do, which I completely understand. Right. So I think that might be why that's sometimes the case, but I also don't like to dismiss the work. I use all of these experts' work as a basis for my own research or for my scripts where I'm educating people on my channel, because they've done wonderful work, and often it's just not that well known. You find a new piece of research, and it's like, wow, it's
they're just so narrow-minded.
And the scientific or the news will pick up something like the Cahokia Plaza. It'll do a quick summary and move on, and it's actually a really interesting find. It needs to be bigged up. It needs to be talked about more. And then you need to speculate. You need to say, okay, so if this is the case, what does this mean for mounds in general? And do we think that this could be something we find everywhere? And you need to sort of keep going further with it. But everybody's too afraid to speculate. Press releases are very dry. Press conferences are very dry. The reports on the academic papers are very dry. And that's where we step in, I think, as independent researchers and entertainers to some extent. Mm-hmm. We go a bit further sometimes, or we find connections. Like I will mention a few things. Like I looked at Göbekli Tepe and I mentioned the fact that alcohol was found there, and there was a school court found there, and I turned it into a video about alcohol-fueled school courts. In reality, they're two separate pieces of research. You don't necessarily need to put them together, but it was, I thought, an entertaining way of doing it.
Yeah.
But like,
I mean, the other thing too is I think you nailed it, and I think that. Well, I don't think that they would admit it. I think a lot of the academics are actually jealous that they can't step out and do it. Maybe some aren't. They're so brainwashed to thinking that they have to do this slow, incremental, scientific method aspect of it where, it's this very specific, narrow-minded, pursuit kind of a thing. And like you said, I think that there's something to be gained from that as well. And I think that we should use that information and data and kind of look at it. But I think that that's why we were mentioning Graham Hancock. I think that's why people hate Graham Hancock, because he can take all that data and kind of give a broad overhead view of what he thinks is going on, or lay out a hypothesis or a theory, or not even just him, Randall Carlson, whoever you want to say within these fields, and lay something out. And I think that it ruffles the feathers of the academics because they have to stay very disciplined and narrow-minded in what they're doing. And I think that's where, but it's like, come on. I mean, I feel like we need more polymaths and complex science, thinkers and things like that, complexity scientists and things like that, because we're just at a point now where it's like, what's, all this stuff's interesting, but let's start taking some chances here,
Yeah, everyone wants to know solve the mystery, and if you do not kind of offer an explanation or a possible explanation, it gets filled with ancient aliens.
Mm-hmm.
It gets filled with
Aliens
a
of the
lot of,
gaps.
and even like when I watched that in the past, I've seen a few episodes where every single statement that's made in the first 10 minutes I can debunk because it'll say something like, "Oh, because like the dolmens of Ireland that are 10,000 years old, they're not 10,000 years old. What are you talking about?"
Right.
And it's like there isn't even any basic facts. I mean, if there was lots of facts and then they said we think it was aliens, I don't mind that. Why
Right.
not speculate away? But when you actually are getting some of the actual dating wrong and the basic facts wrong within the script, I get quite annoyed with that. Where are the researchers? What are they doing? Just making up numbers? Like, I don't know. But that's why, but it doesn't matter because it's a sensationalist thing that people aren't really looking at that. And like you say, the one good thing about it is they've opened up the public consciousness about certain sites. Not just Göbekli Tepe. I once watched an episode and heard something and thought, wait, and I looked it up and I wasn't familiar with that particular area. So, there's that too.
Listen, History Channel, if you're listening to us right now, give Laura and I a show where we just talk about these ancient structures with no aliens, and it'll be one of your most popular shows.
Yeah, totally.
That's my pitch. That's the pitch.
We're promised to be really funny too. So.
Yeah. Oh, I'll add some comedy in there. Yeah, we'll get something going.
You could play your guitar.
There we go. Play the guitar we're going to summon entities at the megalithic sites on psychoactive compounds, and that's part of the show. But no, I like I said, I think that I think what you're doing is important because you are highlighting the gray areas, if you will, or the areas that aren't set in stone with the data or the research. And a lot of this stuff's going to be proven wrong or thrown out or revised in the future anyway. So again, I think it's important to throw out different, even if it's speculation or whatever, but you do a good job. Like there's a lot of, alternative archaeology channels on YouTube or fringe archaeology channels. But I think that you do what I would be doing if I was doing what you were doing, which would be looking at the evidence of what's there and then, okay, where's the blind spots? Okay, you don't have an answer for this? What are possible explanations for it? So I love what you're doing because I would be doing the same thing.
And I'm trying to do separate to that proper research so I can come up with much more comprehensive theories on which explains certain data points that I've collected. But I can't really do that yet. And people keep asking me to, and I'm like, listen, I'm coming to it. But sometimes it's actually quite hard to find the information that you want to. So a lot of academic stuff is not open source. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is that, so I was walking to a menhir in Sardinia, and I walked up a hill, and I felt like the hill was an old waterfall. Mm. It seemed to have all the erosion markers of a waterfall, and when you got to the bottom, there was a stream and a valley, which was really tiny, but would have been much bigger at some point in history. But I don't know which point. So I tried to find geological papers on that area because I thought, I don't think we can explain that menhir that's 5,500 years old without knowing the geology of that area at the time.
Right.
I couldn't find anything. Nothing. Not in Italian, not in English. So it probably was a waterfall, but it could have been hundreds of thousands of years ago for all I know. Probably not during the Neolithic, but I just can't find that information. There's been no research into that. So, it is really hard to explain certain phenomena if there hasn't been all of these different pieces of research put together, interdisciplinary on that particular site. And you're often missing these data points.
Have you thought about, like, I know you can get, like, I don't know if it's a LiDAR app or some sort of small device. Have you looked into doing, like, some sort of LiDAR on some of these sites?
Not yet. People keep asking me that. I don't even know how.
Again, I know that there's a way to do it on a smaller scale. Obviously, they can do it from planes and things like that, which they do when they fly over, like, South America and Central America and find those sites covered in trees and things like that. Like Mayan sites. But they do have. I'll find it for you and I'll send it to you because I think that would benefit what you're doing for sure.
I also need to buy a drone. I know this because it would be great to have some drone footage. When it comes to Sardinia, I follow this guy Enrico who does a tour guiding, and he's got a really amazing Instagram page where he features all his pictures, and a lot of them are drone videos and drone photography. And he lets me use his stuff and credit him.
That's awesome.
But really, and I mean, because I'm not like an expert at that, and if I do start to do it, I'm sure it'll take me a while to get the hang of it. But I'm not making pretty stuff like he is. For me, it's more to collect data, to have a database of all the different places I've been to, and the aerial views really help. So I do think I should learn that as well. LiDAR and drones should definitely be on my list to expand what I think, can do with my brand.
I think it would really, it would add a different dimension to what you're doing. Not that you need it, but I think that, look, who doesn't love some good drone footage of some megalithic sites, right? I mean,
it really helps you get an understanding. I mean, when I went to that well, we were talking about the the sacred well of Santa Cristina in Sardinia. When you stood next to it, you do not know there's a keyhole shape. You only know it from the drone footage. So when I did a video on it, even though I'd been there and I had photographs of it, I just thought, I can't do this video justice without getting some drone footage, which is then when I reached out to Enrico to borrow his. But so, some sites you wouldn't be able to understand the magnitude of them if you can't see them from the sky. And in Malta, I asked for permission to film, and they said I could film with a drone because there was a photographer I knew that could do drone footage at Gigantea, but it has to be from a distance at an angle. You're not allowed to actually fly over the structure.
Right.
And then I looked online. There's actually quite a lot of drone footage of Gigantea, so I said, can't I do like Hajar'im or one of those other ones that's got the tent over it and just do lower drone footage? They said, no, absolutely not. Like, it's completely protected. You're not allowed to bring any kind of drone in there. And I was like, because the problem is that the aerial photography done on those sites before the protected tents were put up is super old. Like, it's ages ago. Right. And it doesn't necessarily get every angle. And it's got me thinking, I really wonder what's there and what's there. But you can't do it now because of the protective tents, which they need because of erosion. So fair enough.
Yeah.
And you can't just squeeze a drone in there.
Yeah, you fly a drone into House Affiliani and just go down through all the little nooks and crannies. I want to ask you one more thing before we start to wrap it up. You know, there's a whole little community. Shout out to Ancient History Criticisms. Go check out his channel if you haven't already. What do you think about this nub stuff? Nubs on all these different, like they're known as, I guess in mainstream, as lifting bosses. That's what they were used to, like, lift or carry things around. But there's ones that don't make sense from that context. So like, have you looked into it? Like, what do you think's going on there?
Yeah, I look at all of the pictures that the nubs community put online and the video footage. Ziggy Dan often messages me when I'm on a trip and says, any nubs on this trip? And I'm like, hold on. Yes. And actually I went to a temple last week and I found nubs, plenty of nubs, but they are in the mainstream literature. It says lifting bosses. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. It's strange because the ones that are really randomly placed, I thought they look a bit like Morse code. Maybe there's a language encoded in it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem that likely. Then the ones that I saw last week, they're just regular shapes. They probably are part of the construction. Okay, fine. Then I saw some on some steps and I thought maybe they were part of like maybe water ran down the steps and they were designed to make the water go a certain way. Like,
they're even in some of the Greek amphitheaters, like where the foot, like where you would, the different like levels there, the step ups in the amphitheaters. There's some on those, which that doesn't make sense either. No. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird.
And so then I thought maybe that was for water or something. Then I thought, no, that doesn't make sense because then why would those ones be there? Oh, they're so strange. They're so strange. And I don't have an explanation for that. I'm starting to build up my own sort of explanations for menhirs. But then again, you start to find anomalies with that too. It's difficult.
Yeah.
But nubs, they're really strange. That's for sure.
Because the only thing I have a problem with is if you're building this amazing megalithic structure and everything's perfect or close to perfect and there's a lot of detail and things like that, how come you didn't chisel or sand that down or whatever? Like, why did you leave that? Like that just doesn't make any sense to me.
If it was used to push things into place or whatever, yeah, why leave it? Even I said that about the circular spheres that are at the front of a lot of the temples. And one was actually found underneath the megalith, so at Tarshin. So the archaeologists think that these spheres were for rolling the megaliths into place, but I still have a problem with that because these were very organized people. Mm-hmm. So you're saying to me, Gigantia, which was in use for 1,000 years, they rolled the megaliths into place and just left the balls lying around, even though everything else was so perfectly finished and beautiful, and they plastered and painted the walls. Makes no sense. I don't think that's what they were for, but I don't know what they were for. The one that's under the megalith could be an anomaly of some kind. I mean, it's not like they've gone into all of them to find them, and they're not necessarily, even when they have excavated some of them, they haven't found them everywhere. So I don't know. I really question that.
Yeah.
That they were for rolling into place. Don't know.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of weird stuff. Mentioning balls, like what about those balls in Puerto Rico and different other Mesoamerican sites that have those like they're like polished sphericals or polished spheres? Were those used, in some sort of recreation of astral alignments, or like, I don't know, what do you think about those?
I just don't know. I've read about them. They're huge.
Yeah.
And I just don't know.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to say.
Yeah.
There's so many anomalous bits and pieces, isn't there, when you get into it?
What's your next trip?
Crazy.
Where do you going to next?
I don't know. I haven't planned, because now when the winter sets in the Mediterranean, I'd hibernate because I hate winter.
How cold does it get there?
The Mediterranean is, I don't know. Mostly it's always in between 10 and 15 Celsius. So, like,
I don't know what the conversion is to Fahrenheit. I'm an American. We don't know about Celsius.
What's Fahrenheit for
I'm
0?
looking it up right now.
Yeah, I always get confused with this.
Okay, so it's 50 degrees. So, yeah, the formula is whatever the difference is times 9/5 plus 32. Sounds kind of complicated.
Yeah.
But yeah, 50 degrees fair.
Yeah, but
50 is cool. Yeah, 50 is cool.
No, but they don't come with heating, remember. You don't have heating.
Oh, okay.
Houses don't come with heating.
Sure, I get what you're saying.
Not in Malta anyway. So, I mean, we have some heating sources in the house, but it's not like
and you're around the water. The water makes everything cooler too.
When you go to the UK, and obviously because there's not many trees on Malta or hills, super high hills, so it gets sharp winds too that can make it a bit worse. It rarely goes to freezing, and you don't get snow or anything like that. Not like in England where you have to defrost your car before you can leave in the morning and things like that. But you don't have the central heating and the cozy houses that you have in England either. So the lack of coziness is what annoys me, because I make the house as cozy as I possibly can. And then I go to a restaurant and the restaurant won't have heating. And it's like 10 degrees and you're like, seriously,
you got to go to like a brick oven pizza place or something to get that warmth from that oven.
So that annoys me a little bit about the Mediterranean. And sometimes when you travel around, you can find that as being a bit of a problem. So not that it's like that everywhere in the Mediterranean, but it can happen. So I don't really do much. I like to travel around the Mediterranean. I'm trying to do videos on many places, but my core research, the stuff that I'm working on a book on, is in the Mediterranean, Central Mediterranean. So I need to do more trips on that. And I need to wait till the spring until I'm comfortable to travel. Basically.
Where you go? Like, where would you like to go?
I want to check out another Etruscan site on the west coast of mainland Italy. I want to check out the Cyclopean walls of Santa Severa. I want to do Greece again. When I went to the Oracle of Delphi before, I didn't take any pictures because I was just on holiday and I'd never really bothered.
No, you got to get pictures.
So now I want to go back and do lots of footage of that area. I want to go to Knossos because I've been to Crete, but I was young. I haven't really much memory of it.
If you go to Eleusis,
my list is fairly extensive.
If you go to Eleusis, I've got some specific places I want you to take some pictures of too. So let me know.
Okay.
Let me know if you ever go there because there are some interesting things that I know that are there that I would like to get some pictures of.
I mean, I like these trips because they're quite short in the sense of there's not long flights, but even from Malta, often there aren't direct flights, so you have to change and things. I mean, just going to Sicily last week, I thought this is going to be great. It's just half an hour flight, and then I pick up a car and I booked a hotel half an hour from the airport, and it's not a big airport. I'm going to be there so fast. So much went wrong, which if anyone wants to see my vlog that I did, instead of my normal history video, I did a vlog about that trip. It was just one thing after another.
How's the food? What's the food like in Malta? Is it like Italian influenced, or like what's the cuisine like? Different?
British, quite British.
Is it?
It's a mixture of British and Italian and Maltese. Yeah.
Interesting.
So there's some specific dishes which are Maltese, and then there's a lot of Italian influence, and there's a lot of British influence. Okay. I mean, I can get pretty much everything when I go to a restaurant, similar to a menu in England, for example. When you go to Italy, it's very Italian.
Sure, I got
so you. It's a bit different. Here, it's not really like that.
So
it's very mixed.
Bangers and mashed pizza, or like a hybrid.
No, it's just very cosmopolitan. Like you can get a bit of everything. Like if you have a steak, they'll do it. It's often the British way with pepper sauce, but then you can also get the Italian style with tagliata. You can get loads of different kinds of pasta. It's very mixed. Culturally, I think there's a lot of influences over the past few hundred years. So
cool, interesting stuff. Well, let's wrap it up here. As always, you are welcome back on the show anytime. We'll have you back on soon. And keep doing what you're doing. Congratulations on the monetization, and I really love your videos. And you just have such a great outlook on it, and such you look at the mysteries while keeping your integrity, which is something I always try to do. And it's not easy sometimes, right? So like, keep doing what you're doing. I find it fascinating. And I always keep my eye out for your psychoactive compound segments, because those are my favorite ones.
Actually, I was just reading a paper on another one, which I don't know if I'm going to do a video on that, and then you can tell me if you've heard of that one. I'm sure you probably have.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, I'll keep looking out for those, and if anybody hasn't already, please go subscribe to Laura's channel. It's called Megalith Hunter. I have the link down below. She's on Instagram and also Twitter. And like I said, I see Sandy's in here. Shout out to Sandy. I would like to do a Twitter space with Laura and Sandy as my co-hosts, where we will go through and talk about all these mysteries, because I think that would be super fun. So look for that in the future. And thank you so much, Laura. I look forward to your book. I know you probably just started working on it, but whenever you get done, I will be ready to read it. So thank you so much, and I appreciate what you're doing. Just keep doing it. And if anybody's interested and wants to support Mind Escape, just click the LinkTree link down below. We've got a merch store. Actually, while we're talking about megaliths, I actually recreated the Portara of Naxos onto a t-shirt, kind of a composite of a bunch of different angles, so check that out. Also, we've got a Patreon. We've done some Patreons with Laura in the past. Go check that out if you like Randall Carlson. We've got Patreons with him. We've got Patreons with pretty much a lot of people that we've had on the podcast, so go check that out. What else? Oh yeah, the easiest way to support the show is just leave us a nice 5-star review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. We really appreciate that. Shout out to Old Vet Shane, or Old Vet Symposium Shane, our producer. He is at Wounded Warriors in Boston. Enjoy your trip, my man. And shout out to Maurice. He will be back on the 30th for the Dr. Rick Strassman episode. And that's it. we love everybody. Stay safe out there, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.
Bye.